Hi, and welcome to the Birth and Rebirth podcast. I'm Tiffany Caligari.
And I'm Kirsten Clark. We are born again birth workers who share the birth stories of Christian women, highlighting God's perfect design.
And their testimonies of finding Jesus. Here, we will chat about many topics pertaining to birth, spirituality, and everything in between.
Let's dive in.
Hello, girl.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are
I'm
you doing?
trying so hard to be a morning person right now.
Both of us.
But we're here. Um, all right, this has been a long time coming. This
Yes, we've been
episode.
going back and forth, and life has just been happening. But we are finally here to record Tiffany's testimony, and I am very, very excited because her story is quite incredible. So yeah, Tiffany, where do you want to start?
Okay. Well, alrighty. I'll just start from the childhood. That's where it all begins.
It always begins in childhood.
And sure, um, I was a I was a very interesting young little girl. So me and actually my brother as well, had like really intense night terrors when we were younger. Like we would see things in this apartment that we lived in for years. Um, and that's kind of like I feel like where the enemy planted seeds to kind of like open my mind up and pique my curiosities in like the spiritual realms because um it was really clear like when I was younger that I was like seeing spirits and hearing spirits. And so a little backstory, I had a pretty rough, beginning in life. Just family dynamic was really off. My dad was addicted to drugs until I was 16. So there was just like lots of roller coaster rides, to say the least. And we lived in this apartment with my uncle and my aunt. They lived upstairs from us. And this was like the apartment that I would say we lived in the longest when I was younger. And I later had found out that she was like um had like some kind of history with black magic. She used to like gift me these porcelain dolls, and at night I would like hear all of these spirits come out, and it was really, really creepy. And even my mom kind of like witnessed some weird stuff. And it was like getting to the point where it was just so intense because I was like seeing this like one little like dark figure thing at night that would kind of like taunt me until I fell asleep. And then the porcelain dolls. So there was just like a lot of like dark kind of stuff going on in my household. And then my parents were Christians when I was 12. And that really kind of like changed changed things. Like we moved out of that apartment, no longer was experiencing or anything like that. So I do think that it had something to do with like either that apartment specifically or the fact that my aunt lived upstairs and she was doing like some kind of black magic stuff.
It was the porcelain dolls. Like,
And
what?
the porcelain dolls, like, girl. super weird. I remember this one time I was like laying down in bed and I just couldn't like get these like voices to stop. And it was like really scaring me. And then all of a sudden I hear like a smashing on the floor, and it was one of the porcelain dolls. But somehow, like the stand that it stands on, it's like hooks on the back of the porcelain doll. There's like a hook
Mhm.
back of it, and you like kind of just like put it on top of this stand. So it was like the stand was still perfectly like stood up, but somehow the porcelain doll was on the floor. It like didn't make any sense. It was weird, and I remember my parents being like weirded out by it. Um
Ooh, I'm getting the
yeah,
willies. Like,
it was just weird. It was just weird.
oh man.
But yeah, so my parents, born again Christians, now we're going to church all of a sudden, and I'm kind of like, I'm in my rebel, phase in my preteens, and then, once I hit teenage years, it was kind of like just downhill from there because I had such a rebellious spirit and I just wanted to just do all the things that I wasn't supposed to do. Um, so at 17, I got pregnant with my son Dylan. And I'm like about to graduate high school, about to like start college. I find out I'm pregnant and everything changes for me. Um, of course, I decide to keep the baby, although I did kind of like go back and forth about getting an abortion, but it just really didn't feel right. Um, and so I became a mom October 21st, 2011. And I just like fell into motherhood pretty gracefully and like I fell in love with it. Like I was obsessed with my baby and but there was a lot of chaos happening around me, and me and his father were not on good terms. We weren't together, and we ended up getting into a really ugly custody battle not too long after having Dylan. So postpartum period was really tough for me because I didn't have that time or space to just enjoy my baby and recover and nourish myself. Like there was none of that. It was like
Mhm.
I had Dylan. 2 months later, I started college. I was, traveling like all across New York City because I lived in New York City at the time. And I'm like trying to breastfeed. I end up getting mastitis. It's like a really tough breastfeeding journey from there. I'm stressed out because of, this court case with my son's father. Um, but I'm also at this time starting to go back to church because, I had left the church and my parents kind of just stopped forcing me like, in my later teenage years to go to church. Um, so yeah, I had the desire to start going back to church, and I started going with my brother and my dad. My parents had gotten a divorce when I was 16,
Mhm.
so they weren't together anymore, but I was still very close with both of them. So I'm going back to church. I'm like battling postpartum depression, but I don't really know that I'm battling postpartum depression. Um, and then I see this. Oh, so I get baptized when I was 18, and like shortly after having Dylan. Um, and then a few months later, I end up coming across this super, super evil video on Facebook. It's like one of those, I don't know if you remember Facebook back in the day, but it used to be kind of like crazy, like
Yeah,
just
like a lawless land.
really out of control. And there were videos on there that like should never have even, been uploaded kind of thing. Well,
Hmm.
I came across a really traumatizing video of this mother like beating her newborn baby, and I it broke me. Like it literally like broke something in my brain. My new, like, just postpartum in motherhood for the first time, like trying to navigate all the hormones but really is struggling to do so. Like
Mm.
that Tiffany could not handle what she saw. Like it did something to me, and I became really
Well,
resentful.
it's not even like something in your brain, but something in like your soul, you know, like when you see those kinds of things on the internet or in person, it does something to like your spirit. And we always have to be so, so mindful and so careful about what we're letting into our eyes and our ears. But that's
Mhm.
what's tricky about the internet, girl. Even recently, here in like the last year, there's been times where I'm scrolling on Facebook and, you know, it's not anything graphic or violent, but I'll definitely find myself watching something and it disturbs me deeply in my spirit. And
Yeah.
yeah, I can't imagine just being in that vulnerable place postpartum and then seeing that like how deeply it would have affected you.
Oh, it like really did something to me. Like even to this day, like my dad, because I remember I told my dad about it because I brought up this conversation about how could God exist when these
Mm,
exist. And, in my 18-year-old brain, like this was a very profound like question, and like I'm having a whole existential crisis essentially, and contemplating everything that I ever believed. And my dad, of course, being a lot more mature in his walk with the Lord as well, like just knowing that like we live in a fallen world, and like the answer is quite clear and simple. Um there was no explaining though to me. Like in that moment, it was like nope, like all right, Tiffany's gonna have to take the long route, because I completely turned my back to God after that. I was really just super resentful. And so then I started dating like, first time dating after, having my son, splitting up with his dad. Um and this is maybe about a year postpartum, and he's Buddhist, and I'm very intrigued. I'm on this like self-discovery, spiritual journey, whatever you want to call it. And I'm intrigued by all the different Buddhist practices that he would be a part of. And I started to want to learn more, and Eastern philosophy and Eastern medicine, Eastern religion, like always intrigued me. So, like being in this relationship with this person that just knew so much about that world. He was like becoming an acupuncturist, and he was also like 12 years older than me, I want to say, like about, yeah, either like 10 or 12 years older than me. There was a big age difference, and
hmm,
I remember that like really doing like influencing kind of like my attraction to him, because I just like wanted someone that like could lead me, like there's
hmm,
like a deep part of us like as women who want that. And although like society and feminism like tells us to want the complete opposite and not, be led by a man, I do feel like the Lord, has planted that desire within us for a reason. Um
Mm.
and and so anyways, it was just like things took off from there. I joined uh massage therapy school, which was really like changed my life at that time because I just was exposed to a whole new world, like the holistic world of plant medicine and psychedelics, the world of, Hinduism and Buddhism and, Eastern philosophies. And just like that was where it began for me with the new age. And yeah, it was just like every day I was just learning something new and, just really going deeper and deeper into like my spiritual practices. I started like attending kirtans, which I don't know if you have ever heard about them, but they're like it's like a Hindu practice, or I maybe Buddhist too, because there's a lot of overlaps with the two religions, but you basically get into like big groups and you chant for like extended periods of time, like, you know,
Whoa.
2 hours. And so I would like do this a lot, and I started to experience like what it felt like to have like your spirit leave your body and, hallucinate from chanting. Um, and so I would get like really excited about all these things. Like I was really convinced that like we were here to explore like the superpowers of being a human, and just like
Mm.
constantly like leveling up. Like how do I level up? Like my spirit. It was just like a big game for me. So I so then shortly after that, I became like really interested in using psychedelics as a way to heal my trauma and like face my quote unquote shadow self.
The
And
shadow shelf.
the shadow, I was constantly doing shadow work. So I start going to these ayahuasca ceremonies and peyote ceremonies, and mushroom mushrooms were like mushrooms were like my what marijuana is to a lot of people, where it's just kind of like a daily use sort of thing.
Mm.
And it's like kind of nonchalant for a lot of people who use it regularly. Like that's what mushrooms was for me at that time, which is alarming because because there are big differences between mushrooms and marijuana, and I was like daily, like microdosing and or like taking some before I would do my meditations and my chanting. Um, and so safe to say I kind of became addicted to psychedelics, which you don't hear very often as like a thing because they're not addictive, like people
Hmm.
say like, no, you don't get addicted to that. But I was addicted to leaving my body. I was addicted
Yeah.
to that.
And that's what, like, when people say, "Oh, well, psychedelics aren't addictive," or even like, weed isn't addictive, but you get addicted to the experience, you get addicted to the feeling. Like, even if the substance, like your body isn't craving the substance, you are craving the
Mhm.
experience that the substance gives you.
Absolutely.
And we are fleshly beings, and it's so easy to just be like, oh, well, I really liked how that made me feel. So I'm gonna keep doing it again and again and again.
Yeah, exactly. We can get addicted to anything. And And I was certainly addicted to that kind of lifestyle and just everything about it. Like, I was addicted to going deeper in my spirituality and, well, at least that's what I thought I was doing.
Yeah.
But it was weird because I would, do these things in the name of whatever, bettering myself and, my spiritual practice. And it was like a part of my religion, so to speak. Um, but I was living like a very, how do I say it? Like, the lifestyle that I was leading was just so chaotic because you had like the version of Tiffany that was like on this self discovery, trying to like better herself. And then simultaneously, I am like a dominatrix at a dungeon,
Mm.
which,
Yeah.
you know, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's essentially a sex worker. I mean, I didn't ever have sex for money, but um it's a fetish, and you basically beat people and you get paid for it. And I was doing that. And that, I mean, it sounds pretty dark when you say, like working in a dungeon, but it was dark. It was like
Yeah.
spiritually very dark. It was a very tough place to be in. Even for me at the time, like being in the darkness the way that I was, it still felt really dark being there. Um,
Yeah.
but I was doing it anyway because like I was all about like pushing the boundaries. That was who I was. I was like, how how much crazier can I get without being crazy? Like
Yeah.
so so yeah, I was just living this like really wild life. I was in this relationship still with this man, and we were at this point in an open relationship. I'm doing crazy things for work. He didn't really care. Um it was a weird relationship, and then we eventually broke up, um which was great, and but it didn't really help me for you know this purpose of like my spiritual journey, because I kind of just kept going deeper into it, but instead of being like so involved in the Eastern practices and stuff, that was influenced by being around him, I was getting involved in more witchcraft. um
Mm.
so I started like, well, I had already been reading tarot cards, but because that's kind of like, actually tarot was introduced to me in massage therapy school, because you learn about the I Ching, which I don't know if you've heard of before, but it's the I Ching is kind of like um the Chinese like tarot in a way. Um it's like a form of divination, and so that kind of like exposed me to like tarot and stuff, and so I was like already pretty deep stuff, but then I started to kind of quote unquote tap into my psychic abilities, and
Mm.
I was actually really good at that, and that was like something that I felt like I had this gift. And this is the deception, right? It's like you have these abilities that you may or may not have like always had before, and then you feel like, oh, I must have been given this for a reason, and like I'm special. And that's what the enemy wants you to think. Like,
Mhm.
he'll give you whatever, this ability, or um he'll give you something that seems like such a positive thing, but it's really just to keep you going further down the path that he wants you on. And that's what this psychic ability that I had at that time did for me, because I thought, well, this is so tangible. So this is proof that this stuff that I'm like immersed in right now is real because how am I able to know these things about people that I've never met before? You
Yeah.
know, like clearly I'm being influenced by a higher power here.
Hmm.
And so that just kind of like solidified my belief in all of this stuff because I'm like, oh, it's working. Like I am leveling up spiritually, you know, and ascending into this like higher, realm or whatever I thought I was doing at that time. Um, so anyway, I'm like really into witchcraft and I'm like loving it because it to me was like so exciting that I could just like desire something and then like do a spell and it would
Hmm.
come to fruition. So I I'm also at this point in time, I'm like I'm single, but I'm like really just promiscuous and kind of like a party animal. Um I was drinking a lot and I was partying a lot and I was just doing a lot. I don't know how I had even the time to be doing all this because at the same, while all of this is happening, I'm raising Dylan, but I had joint custody with his dad, and so I did have a good amount of free time as well. And I was not using any of that free time for like good things. I was just being so reckless and I get to this point where, I get back from this vacation that I went on with my best friend. We went to DR and I was so wild on this trip and I was just like so reckless, even to the point where I got into an argument with my best friend about it because I was just like I was doing danger. I genuinely was reckless. Like
Yeah.
leaving the bar with a guy that I just met in a foreign country, like not even telling any of my friends where I'm going, like that kind of stuff. Like just really did not care. And so when I came back from that vacation, I remember feeling like really empty and like that void just kept getting bigger and bigger and it just was not being filled and I tried to fill it with all the things, like sex, drugs, men, like you name it. I was trying to make it happen. Witchcraft, money, um, and it wasn't doing it. So I end up doing this big love spell. And it was this whole thing. And I was like, I know that this is going to lead me to my husband.
Mm.
So later that week, I actually met my husband. And I didn't know he was my husband at the time, but we ended up getting married. And we had a really kind of like wild, intense, relationship off the bat, as I'm sure you could imagine. And um, both party animals, like, just craziness. I started a business called Yonigasm and I was selling crystal dildos and I was basically teaching women about m- the power of masturbation and
Hmm.
how you can use masturbation to basically manifest what you want in life. Um, and how you can use it to heal your sexual traumas and
So
I
like sex magic.
essentially, but it was also I didn't want to say just sex magic because I was basically preaching this whole like philosophy of like you can heal yourself and you can do it while you orgasm. Like that was
Mm.
kind of my jam. Like I was really into womb health and like the yoni steaming and like the jade eggs, the yoni eggs, all that stuff. So it was more kind of coming from this place of like, let's heal, but also like everything was about sex for me at that
Mhm.
time. So I was like, but let's make it, that too. So I'm doing that and I'm like getting deeper and deeper into witchcraft too. And so then I start selling the like the magic candles and I become a Reiki master and I'm doing like Reiki on everything. I'm like Reiki obsessed, okay? Like it was just like out of control. And I'm like hosting Reiki circles every month and I have like a membership going on and I'm like getting a crew together and it's like I'm seeing like wow, this is like I'm like really doing the thing right now and like everything that I start like turns into something big and I'm just like so on a high seeing how like I'm quote unquote manifesting this life that I wanted. Um and it was really kind of blowing my mind and just made me like further solidified in my belief that this is what I'm meant to do, you know?
Mhm.
Um and so I'm like taking these spiritual baths every night because at this point I am so like on an energetic level depleted because I'm doing energy work for complete strangers online. Like, you know, I don't even know you and like we're doing like Reiki on Zoom and I'm like, just opening myself up completely. I'm channeling spirits. I'm essentially allowing myself to become possessed by these different spirits during these sessions. I have had like really, really intense experiences where,
Mm.
like I can't do anything for the rest of the day. Like I'm done. I'm tapped out. So I would take these spirit baths, quote unquote, to kind of like cleanse and restore, my energy.
Mhm.
And but in these like during this time when I would like take these spiritual baths, I would be like crying and like so sad and I'd be questioning everything um and basically so one of these days I had been like trying to like I guess tap into this part of my brain that I felt was like blocked off because there was so many chunks of my childhood that I could not remember. Like
Yeah.
chunks of I'm telling you like years of just like what? Like I was what? Like how do I not know anything, about being a kid? Um and so that was kind of a big goal of mine in my spiritual journey was to unlock those memories so that I can process like the trauma that I experienced in those years. One day I'm like in this bath and I'm, doing a meditation and I'm going through all my chakras and I'm like doing the Reiki and I'm doing the everything, like just really trying hard to like get to something. And and then all of a sudden this very clear, vivid memory of me getting raped when I was 12 years old comes up. And I immediately know it's real because I remembered like all of the details. Like in that moment, it was just like, boom, like the memory was never gone. It was just like, wait, what? Like this, it was so real. It was like I remembered the person who did it and like everything. And I just kind of like lose my mind because I couldn't believe that my brain blocked that memory out for so many years. And
Mm-hmm.
and it wrecked me. And I ended up, you know, talking to my parents about it, trying to kind of like get to the bottom of it, like hear it to you, like you know, fact checking like my memories about this. And, you know, we end up like figuring out like exactly when that was and all of it. And it was really hard. It was really hard for like me. It was really hard for my parents and like my brother and like it was just a really hard time for me because
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that that happened and that I didn't tell my parents and that I didn't, you know, feel comfortable and I felt shame and I thought it was my fault. And um it was a hard time for me to sit with that and think back to 12-year-old Tiffany taking the responsibility for like someone else's actions and totally thinking that it was my fault. And
Yeah.
and I had never related or could understand that narrative when I would hear people say this, you know, like, you know, you would hear stories of like this happening and people thinking that it was their fault and like feeling guilty. And I'm like, huh? Like, how could you feel that? Like that it wasn't your fault. And then, you know, being in that place and realizing like, oh wow, that's what I did. That's exactly how I felt about it. It was and hard to process. But you know, I kept going and I find myself just a few weeks later, like in the same bathtub, doing the same thing, kind of just like trying to surrender to this, like, you know, information that I learned about myself and trying to process it and all of that. And, um, but I'm like really sad and I'm really depressed and I'm kind of like losing my mind a little bit because you know, I'm really doing a lot of channeling and that stuff is really dangerous. Like I'm just gonna say that, like straight,
Yeah.
it's
It, and
dangerous.
I did want to ask, like, are you still doing like mushrooms and plant ceremonies at this time?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I had stopped attending ayahuasca ceremonies because mainly just because they were too hard to, like, access. They're, like, very kind of exclusive circles. You need to, like, know a person who knows a person who knows a person who knows a shaman
Mm-hmm.
who's traveling from, like, Colombia and will happen to be in Brooklyn. So yeah, that once I left, the school that I was in, it was and stopped hanging out with a certain crew of people, it was hard to access that on my own, but, I was still doing lots of mushrooms, and actually, I was going to bring this up right before you asked. So, I had taken I had taken a pretty large dose of psilocybin mushrooms, with my husband at the time. And and this is, you know, right after I find out about like the rape and everything. This is like maybe a couple weeks after. And I told him, hey, I want to take this. We're like just chilling. It's a Friday night. You can take some if you want. He's like, yeah, I made it into a tea. He took a little bit, I took a little bit. I didn't take nearly as much as I had been planning to take. Um, and I'm so glad because when I tell you it was like the second it hit my system, I was gone. Like I had my body was taken over by a spirit. And it was really really scary. I thought I was gonna die because I couldn't breathe. Like, it felt like there was like 1,000 pounds sitting on my chest and I could not breathe. Um, and my hair was standing up on my head. Like, my husband at the time was looking at me like, "What is happening to you right now?" It was frightening. The hair on my arms were standing up, like pin straight standing up. Um, the hair on my head was like basically, when in a in the cartoons when you get like the electrocuted and
Yeah.
all the hair is like that is what was happening to me. It was so scary, and I started to speak a language that I had no idea about. And I just remember being like, "Please, can you leave me alone? Like, I'm scared. I don't like this anymore." And so then the whatever it was, whatever the spirit was that was coming inside of my body, like, I guess decided to leave. And it was traumatizing. I never took mushrooms again after that. And you're talking like I used to call myself the mushroom queen, okay? Because that was
Yeah.
that was my thing. And I told my best friend the next day, I was like, I'm traumatized. I don't know what just happened to me last night, but it was frightening. And I no longer think that this stuff is good. Like, and so this was kind of the beginning. This was the first time ever that I had been like, maybe what I'm doing isn't the right thing.
Yeah.
Like that was the Lord's way of like slowly reeling me back in because I had never thought those things before. It was always like no matter what happened, even darkest of dark times when I was, on these psychedelics and many you're faced with many dark things during this stuff, especially taking ayahuasca, like, a lot of times you're throwing up for hours and the throw up is black and it's like and you're
Oh my gosh, it just doesn't
yeah,
sound fun.
no, it's
The things that I never did get into, I was planning it. I was like trying, like you said, trying to find a friend of a friend of a friend who had a shaman who happened to be coming in town.
yeah.
But I'm honestly thankful that it never worked out because I've heard stories of like just it from what I feel, it's like a lot of demonic activity
Oh,
that
yeah.
happens
Hands
when you
down.
do ayahuasca. And that sounds like what happened with your mushroom trip. Like you just gave legal rights to
Yeah.
a spirit, an evil spirit, and it was like, cool, I'm gonna go party in Tiffany because she's just like opening herself up. And like especially too with reawakening your trauma, that makes you so much more vulnerable in the spirit, and
Mm,
wow, yeah,
yeah,
it's
girl.
like
No,
it's just like
it's
in
it's
Jesus'
super
name.
it's super dark. It's super dark, and I am so, so unbelievably grateful for his grace and his mercy because, girl, when I think back on how many times I should have and could have just died from, like, what I was exposing myself to, like, in and very tangible things. Like, I had briefly got into, like, how reckless I used to be. Like, I'm on vacation in DR, like, at a local bar in a foreign country and leaving with, like, a random stranger, and we don't even really speak the same language,
Yeah.
and just, like, things like there was something about me at that time thought that I was just untouchable. And so the Lord humble has and continues to humble me because, yeah, I was so arrogant. I just thought like I knew everything and that nothing bad would ever happen to me. And yeah, so yeah, I have this wild traumatizing experience with the mushrooms and so here I am again in one of my little, baths, and I'm like super, super, super depressed. This is like just like within weeks of, me remembering about the rape and all of that. And so I'm sad and I'm lost and I'm starting to question what I'm involved in, like spiritually. And I'm crying and I'm just like crying out to whatever the higher power is like at that time I'm like I guess I thought I was crying out to the universe.
Yeah.
Um but I was crying out to the Lord and he was there and he was sitting on my toilet and he just held me like a baby. And it's so funny because I've always been addicted to any kind of like what is the word for it? Like I was addicted to spirituality and just like having really supernatural experiences.
Hmm.
Um and those supernatural experiences like really had a hold on me because it made me think like, oh, this has to be real, if I'm experiencing this like supernatural thing. Um, so I know like the Lord meets you where you are because he's so good and he loves us so much that he'll even like, meet us in that place. And, he will bring himself down to where we are. And so he gave me like a very supernatural experience when he met me in my bathroom when I was crying in my bathtub. And I had my eyes closed, but I just felt this like warmth all around me and it just felt like gold shimmering, like and that's what I when I opened my eyes, that's what I saw. And I was just like I was like, Jesus? Like I just
Mm-hmm.
don't know why. I just knew it was him. And and yeah, like it broke me, but I have to say that I wish that it was like, oh, that experience happened and then that's it. Like I was hooked. I became a Christian. I bought a Bible and I went to church. That is not what happened to me. I had this experience and I was just like, okay, I know that was Jesus and he told me to follow him and he told me like it's okay and he held me and he took all of the pain away in that moment. But like maybe he's just a spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't be like I couldn't just surrender. I was so in for me specifically deep in what I was in that like I was being so stubborn. So I remember like after having that experience being very much kind of like blown away, like, whoa, that has never happened to me before. Like, I'm questioning everything now. What he did do was he planted the seed and he started to give me discernment. And it was impossible after that night to not look at every single thing in my life and question if it was good for me. And
Yeah.
Um, and so I just found myself like each day just being like, guide me. And he would guide me and he would tell me, stop doing that. No, you have to close your business down. You can't do this anymore. You have to stop reading tarot for people. You can't do this anymore. And it was like over the course of weeks, being like, okay, I'm gonna surrender, but just like please tell me what it is that I need to do. I found out I was pregnant, which was amazing because I had been wanting to have a baby so bad. So I got pregnant with my daughter, and I remember with her and still doing Reiki. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember Reiki was like the last thing that I stopped because I don't know if you know about Reiki, but it's the way it's taught is that it's just kind of like universal energy. So
Yeah.
it's very neutral, you know? You're not like opening yourself up like as a channel, and you're not like giving your own energy when you do the work. It's very supposedly a neutral kind of practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really trying to hold on to that and being like, but it's like, it's just Reiki, like it's not that serious. Or my downstairs neighbor was pregnant too, and she was thought she was having a miscarriage. And she came upstairs and she asked me to do Reiki on her. And I was like doing Reiki on her womb for like an hour. And like I remember like the next week just being like, "Oh no, like Lord forgive me. Like please protect that baby." And just, I'm so sorry. I did not realize. So he like for sure gave me conviction on dropping those practices like very shortly after. And then I got to a point where I was like, I'm getting a Bible and I'm gonna read it. I was really not 100% into the idea of it at first, but like I said, like over the course of days, he was just like really convicting me on certain things. And the Bible was one of them, and throwing all of my new age stuff out was one of them. And then before I knew it, like I started listening to worship music. And that was a special thing for me. Like music, I love music. It feeds my soul. And so listening to worship music, it was like exactly what I needed to connect with him. And I had a really stressful pregnancy. I was like going
Yeah.
through a court like battle with my son's father again. Like we were going through a lot because that's when like the vaccination mandates started to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
not to get into like the politics, but if you follow me on Instagram, it's very clear what my um opinions and views are on all that stuff. But he wanted my son Dylan to get vaccinated, and I was like absolutely not. And so we were like really kind of going at it, and that was the last thing I needed to be like going through during the pregnancy that I had, just being as sick as I was and all of that. And there was just so many changes taking place. And so I leaned on the Lord like like I was like, look, I have nothing else. Like I just need you,
Yeah.
Jesus. Please. Like cuz I'm going to lose my mind. At this point I have no income like personally, because I shut my business down.
Yeah.
I'm like fully dependent financially now on my husband at the time. And, you know, and that was fine and all, but it just was so not who I was. Like for me, those were big, 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 big shifts. And then, and battling with the HG and just being so sick and just feeling really terrible all the time. And then having this stress hovering over me about these mandates. And like, I'm living in New York City at the time too, which I don't know if whoever is
Uh,
listening, like if you were in New York City at the time of the vaccine mandates, you just know what I'm talking about. You couldn't go to a restaurant. You couldn't you couldn't do anything. You were no longer allowed to be a normal person.
or like
Vaccinate.
participate in society.
Yeah, I remember going to a friend's birthday party that was at like a restaurant and them being like, "Sorry, you can't come in." And just
Oh,
like it was weird, man. It felt like Black Mirror. I don't know if you ever watched that show, but
unfortunately, yes, I have.
yeah, it just felt really dark.
Yeah. Wow.
So, um so yeah, I was going through stress during this time, but let me tell you, I had the peace of the Lord in my heart because everything happening around me equaled me losing my mind. And I didn't. And I just prayed and I just prayed. And the Lord led my family to move upstate. And our quality of life is a million times better. I didn't think that I'd be able to because I thought that my son's father would fight me in court about it. And the Lord just said, "Do it. Just do it, and I will have your back." And
Yeah.
I did it. I took my son out of school. I started homeschooling him. I was terrified to make that move. I had been wanting to do that for a long time, but I was like, he is going to fight me about it. He's going to try to take custody of my son. Like, there's no way that I can do this. The Lord was like, just trust me. Like, it's going to be fine. I took my
Yeah.
son out of school. It worked out somehow, miraculously. Like, somehow miraculously, my son's father just completely fell back and let me be. And and I remember like after having my daughter just like reflecting and looking back in my prayer journal and seeing like how just throughout my pregnancy with my daughter, like he transformed me. He transformed my mind. He transformed my life. He he m- gave me hope in ways that I've never had before. And when I was in the new age, I always would take risk for my own life, right? We're like the leaders of our life and our journeys. And so everything falls on us. And it's such a like self absorbed kind of way of living. But thought like everything that happened in my life, I took responsibility for it. So
Yeah.
if something good happens, that was me because I manifested it. If something bad happened, that was also me because I didn't do enough shadow work and I need to keep doing more shadow work to resolve my trauma. So, there was always pressure on myself that I was putting on myself to make my life be what I wanted it to be. And once I left that life and I leaned on God, He transformed my entire life. And I no longer felt that pressure to have to like create this life for myself and, be this version of myself that kind of like has it all together because we're not meant to be like that. We're not meant to have all the answers and
Yeah.
to know what direction, we're going in. We're just supposed to have faith and trust the journey. And so it's just been incredible seeing how he has changed me, and just how much I feel like so held even in the most chaotic of times. Um
Yeah.
and it makes no sense, but it is. Because it's just Jesus.
Yeah. Amen, sister. Yeah, I mean, and it's a continuous refining process, right? Like, especially when you've been so deep into other spiritual practices, it's just like the Lord, he just gently like peels back the layers, and however long it has to take, or he's going to guide you. And then it's up to you to listen, right? Like when you got saved, it was like, he was like, no, don't do that. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to obey you because like you gave me something that I can't give myself, which is just
Mhm.
a peace that is inexplainable. Like, so I'm going to listen to you. And I've definitely had this with the Lord where I'm like, but Lord, do I have to give this up? Like, Lord, are you sure? And it's just like, just the most gentling, like gentle, just guidance. And that's
Yeah.
what, that's what the Lord wants for us. He just wants to be like a loving father. And, you know, I'm just so thankful for your testimony. It's so beautiful. And
Mm. He's
yeah, like he met you at just the right time too, like right before the pregnancy and right before like the pandemic craziness that happened in New York. He was just like, all right, I'm just gonna like,
Oh yeah. No, he came through at the most perfect time. And I it's funny because I after that I was like, wow, the Lord really draws me closer to him when I have my babies, because when I had Dylan, I came back to the Lord and I started going
hmm
again, and that's when I had gotten saved really for the first time. And then yeah, like how the story goes after that. But then he brought me to him after, I had, well, not after I had Soraya, but like right as I was get basically when I became pregnant with her, because I was probably already pregnant when that happened, or at least on that kind of path to getting pregnant. Because it was all within weeks of each other, me finding out. And anyways, it's just so incredible how the rebirth of having babies is like also a spiritual rebirth too. And I feel like the Lord is very intentional about that, when it comes to the way that he meets women, because he knows our heart, and he knows how we are, the DNA of motherhood, and he knows exactly how to meet us in a way that is for us. And I see so often when I hear stories, and it's always so close to the time of like either becoming a mother, or whether it's the first time or for a second time, third time, whatever. Each time you have a baby, you are transforming in motherhood. The rebirth doesn't just stop after like the first baby. It's like with every baby, it's like peels back layers of us. and
yeah,
and I just know that like the Lord uses those times in a very specific ways when he, meets his daughters, um where they're at, and saves them. And so it's so beautiful. And then, just to bring it full circle, and this is where like the Birth and Rebirth podcast, even like the thought of it came up, is because there's birth and then there's rebirth, and usually they directly, correlate to each other
Yeah.
in our lives. And so yeah, God is good.
God is so good. And I'm so thankful for you as a friend and as a sister and as a co-host. I'm so looking forward to all the other like stories and testimonies and talks that we'll have as I've been listening to your testimony, there's like at least two or three things and I'm like, "Oh, we should talk about that. Oh, we should definitely talk about that."
Yes, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So many good episodes to come. But yeah, I
Yes.
love you so much too, girl.
Mm.
And I'm so grateful, so grateful.
Alrighty. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Birth and Rebirth podcast.
Make sure to keep up with us on Instagram at the Birth and Rebirth Podcast so you never miss an episode.
And check out our personal pages for our birth services and offerings.
We'll be back next week with another juicy conversation, inspiring birth story, or testimony of God's goodness.
Bye, y'all.